Hello, everyone. My name is Jourdon Delerme-Brown, rising senior on Middlebury's football team. I joint major in Chinese and political science, and I'm coming to you from Mount Vernon, New York.
Hey guys, my name is Ellie. I'm an international politics and economics major, class of 2022. I'm also a swimmer here at Middlebury, and I'm coming from Minnesota today.
Before we get started, I just want to wish everyone health and wellness amidst this coronavirus pandemic and safety in action during this global civil rights movement.
So we're here today to kick off Middlebury Athletics' new series called Leaning Into Discomfort. Throughout the year, we'll be inviting coaches, faculty, alumni, and other guests to join us in a conversation to discuss the ways that identity influences our experience as a student athlete at Middlebury, as well as within the greater Middlebury community. We're asking everyone today to literally lean in, to be a dynamic player in a time when student athlete voices like our own have the opportunity to be amplified.
Our overarching goal is to cultivate a greater Middlebury community through dialogue. Oftentimes, the conversations surrounding identity, diversity, and inclusivity are taboo. We want to normalize these conversations while respecting and identifying the different intersections of identity present on our campus.
So for today's episode called Do You See Yourself in the Locker Room, we'll be discussing our experiences, and hopefully we can resonate a little bit with each other and also with our audience today.
Without further ado, Ellie, you're an active member in SGA as well as your work with the Student Athletes of Color organization and the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. So why is it important for you, someone who's already active in the Middlebury community, to have an active role in clubs such as Student Athletes of Color and a committee such as Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion?
Thanks for asking. For me, SAOC is a place for me, it's a place of belonging, a sense of community. It's a place where I can not only express my full identity as a Chinese American student athlete in the middle of rural Vermont, but also celebrate all aspects of that identity. SAOC is uniquely situated within mid-athletics in the sense that it connects all athletes across the 31 teams that we have, and creates a new support group there. And I think like you and I are a really good example of this, you being a football player and myself being a swimmer. Without SAOC, there's a chance that you and I would never have crossed paths during our time here at Mid. We're literally having this conversation today because we were connected through SAOC. And I'm definitely leaning in today into this conversation because I am hopeful that this series and today will be an opportunity to expand on that space that SAOC has created into the greater Middlebury community.
Now, I totally agree with you. You know, we definitely, I think we wouldn't have the opportunity to meet if it weren't for the SAOC organization on campus. You know, putting our differences in identity together to focus on our similarities is something that SAOC has provided for us. Along that same line, in terms of your identity, in terms of your immediate community, your swim team, how do you think your identity is viewed? Is your identity on the swim team viewed the same way as it's viewed to the greater Middlebury community?
I think that's a really complex question, and I think I can like best describe that in terms of like a bubble. And you find that in almost any community that you have, but today we're talking about athletics of Middlebury here. And I think that comes from making that distinct choice to choose Middlebury as a college and also choose swimming again as something I want to continue to pursue. And when I think about swimming and why do I keep swimming, it is no longer because I want to get fast times. It's no longer about a numerical value. It's about the sense of community that my teammates bring, that come with having 60 plus people that don't only become your teammates, but become a second family away from home during these 4 years. You're literally asking yourself, do you see yourself in this locker room? Most times it is yes, which is great. There are times though when the answer is no. And that for me stems from a feeling that my teammates don't always see me in my full identity. And when that does happen, it can be lonely sometimes.
You said something that I can resonate with wholeheartedly, which is, you know, the community. Oftentimes, your community is supportive. You know, that's why you're there. You made that conscious choice out of all the institutions. You know, you made that choice to come to Mid, and we value that experience. However, I feel like for me personally, there are times when you know, real life situations or circumstances in which I have to think about my identity as a Black man over my identity as an athlete create complexities when I'm within my sheltered community at Middlebury. And you know, a sheltered community doesn't have to necessarily be a negative thing, because when you're in a sheltered community, you can focus on the things you care about, whether that's your athletic passions or your academic ones, and you're able to really get tunnel vision and hone in on those skills with those people around you who care for you. There are times when real situations in life create, you know, complexities. For instance, you know, I came in 2016, height of the election. And that was the first time in my life where football, you know, as my safe haven, you know, it no longer had that same connotation, because the real life aspect of the election and the different views on my team were brought to the forefront on the field. You know, people wearing Trump Pence gear during practice, you know, that has an effect when it's representative of a president or someone who is directly, you know, stating conjectures or misnomers about your own people, your heritage. And that can be difficult. That's the first time in my life I've ever experienced that. So I definitely can resonate with you in terms of your support system kind of changing. So you talked about the bubble, and you mentioned that impact of the shelter community as well. And we talked about how your identity may be different between your teammates and the broader community. But do you think that when you talk about your identity, do you think it's even seen completely on the team? What does that look like? I know we're not asking people to like call you Asian American all the time, you know, and just like, but like how do you think your identity is really represented?
Yeah. Um, I think that's important to note that like I am Asian American and I'm proud to be Chinese, but it's not like the only part of my identity. But we're kind of talking about that there's most people have a multifaceted identity. In terms of athletics and my team, I feel like cultural assimilation is a very real thing. And that once again does happen in every community. You want to have a sense of acceptance, and that comes from following the status quo. And that typically drives the types of conversations that happen on your team, or maybe perhaps the conversations that aren't happening on your team. I can recall this past year, earlier this year, when we had our first major outbreak of coronavirus, COVID-19, the country's president was using so politically charged and racially charged rhetoric against Asian communities, specifically against Chinese people. And during a time when myself and people who also share the same racial identity as me were being threatened, I felt very much alone at school, with my team, in the sense that those conversations didn't happen. There wasn't anything talking about how the president's rhetoric was impacting teammates, myself as well as other teammates maybe that also share my identity, and how that affects my ability to participate actively as a team member. Even though we were off season, I think something that's a beautiful thing that happens at Middlebury is in season, out of season, you're always a team. You're always there for each other. But it felt like, it maybe felt like they didn't see me as a Chinese American. It was almost like an invisible identity. Or I think maybe another way to say it was like a phantom identity. Like I was asking myself, why are those questions not happening? Why are we not having conversations? Do they think it doesn't impact me? Do they see me as me? I think the lack of conversations and the lack of knowing that support is needed in a time like that runs really deep. It's almost like an underlying invisible force.
That's extremely powerful. And what I'm hearing here is the complexity between the intersection of, your identity as an athlete, your identity, your individual identity. And, you talked about cultural assimilation. At times, culture, when you assimilate, it can be a beautiful thing because now, there's a synergy between you and your teammates. However, at the same time, there are situations where because you've assimilated and because you're comfortable there, your identity may be lost from the perspective of your teammates in terms of, you're an exception or so. So where like certain conversations either just don't happen completely, or the tone in which they, are spoken on don't have any empathy, or, it's so that you are different from the rest of your affinity group, when in actuality, you still represent your individual identity, even as, a great teammate, a great swimmer. And, that's something I definitely had to deal with early on, given just the political climate that we came in, and the cultural changes of America. And that was a learning lesson for me, a stepping stone. How do I really come to terms with my own identity and represent that and support that, while trying my best to be a great teammate and not be divisive or confrontational, in the locker room. And that's a battle. That's a real battle. And it takes a toll on you mentally.
Yeah. How has that changed since you walked in to the locker room as a freshman, and now here you're departing soon? How has it changed over 4 years?
Well, one thing I would say about the change, for me personally, I realized when I was younger, I was more confused how to navigate, how to really address that. I mean, for example, even on the campus, when you're not close to your other African American or Black classmates yet, because you've spent most of your time with your football team, but there aren't many of your, many people who look like you on your football team as well. You're kind of caught in the limbo where you're trying to reach your hand to both communities and get, and be involved. And, I had older classmates at the time, who looked like me, and older teammates who, unbeknownst to me, were taking me under their wing, were adding to my support system, so that even during these difficult times, I had someone to talk to. I had a conversation. And it got better over time, because then I became that support system for the younger students and the younger teammates of mine. And so when they're addressing similar problems that I've had, now I'm looking at it, in hindsight, and I'm able to provide advice instead of tons of questions. And I feel like that was a change for me. And that just came from the experience of leaning into discomfort completely, doing something outside of my cultural norms, but now I can help someone do the same thing.
Yeah. You mentioned the concept of having conversations about leaning into that discomfort. When you think about that now, where do you see us going from here, us as a whole entire Middlebury community?
Look, I'm extremely optimistic. There's a lot going on, but I'm extremely optimistic. I've had excellent conversations over my 4 years with people who don't share the same ideologies as me, people who have different political views. And that is just a microcosm of what can happen at Middlebury. If we lean into this discomfort, if we're willing to talk, actually talk and educate ourselves, but respect the voices that are, that have a platform, or that are given a platform to speak, we don't want to talk about opinions. We want to talk about experiences. You can learn about diversity, but you also have to live diversity. And if we can communicate in that way, there are tons of intellectuals on our campus. We will be better for it. So that's how I see MID in the future. And I think the work you do with SAOC and SGA, as well as DEI, is a great example of how we are bridging those gaps in the community.
I agree with that. I definitely think that when I think about Middlebury and what comes next for it, I think about the fact that like this series is a really good example of how we're having conscious inclusion by including a variety of voices, having it be a year-long campaign. And that's what makes me really excited, because I feel like that if you have an open mind and are able to listen, the opportunities for progress are just completely endless. It makes me excited about my next 2 years here. It makes me excited about what Middlebury will look like when we return back as alumni one day. Makes me really excited.
As well. Ellie, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your experience and your perspective. Like I said, I'm greater for it. I've learned from your experience and the ways we're different, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jourdon, for sharing your experience today as well. I was able to resonate with a lot of it, and that's something that I may not have gotten without this conversation. So thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in today and engaging in this conversation with us. Definitely tune into our second episode. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, definitely leave it in the comment section below, especially because our second episode will be featuring athletic director Aaron Quinn, as well as men's basketball coach Brown.